The wind cut across the plains like a blade that morning, carrying with it the dry smell of harvested fields and the promise of winter. Thanksgiving had arrived, but in the small, weather-beaten farmhouse at the edge of the county, gratitude felt like a luxury Eleanor Whitmore could no longer afford. She stood at the kitchen sink, hands submerged in cold water, staring out the window at a sky the color of tin. Beyond the glass, the yard looked emptier than ever. The old oak tree had lost nearly all its leaves, and the chicken coop stood quiet, save for a single hen pecking weakly at the frozen ground. Eleanor's reflection in the window startled her. She barely recognized the woman looking back, thinner, paler, with eyes that seemed too large for her face. 6 mouths to feed, she thought. 6. And barely enough food for 2. It had been 3 years since Thomas died. 3 years since a faulty tractor and a moment of bad luck had turned her from a wife into a widow. Thomas had been strong, steady, the kind of man who could fix anything with wire and patience. When he was gone, it felt as if the house itself had lost its backbone. Things broke more often. The roof leaked, the fence sagged, and no matter how hard Eleanor worked, there was never quite enough. Her children, Mary, 12, Jacob, 10, Ruth, 8, Samuel, 6, and the twins, Anna and Luke, barely 4, were still asleep in the cramped bedroom they all shared. Eleanor had learned to treasure those quiet moments before dawn, when worry hadn't yet fully set its claws into her chest. She dried her hands on a threadbare towel and opened the cupboard. A half bag of flour, a small tin of lard, 2 cans of beans, 1 shriveled onion. That was it. No turkey, no potatoes, no cranberries, not even a loaf of bread. Thanksgiving, she thought bitterly. What kind of Thanksgiving was this? She closed the cupboard and leaned her forehead against the cool wood. She had tried. God knew she had tried. She took in laundry when she could, mended clothes for neighbors, and traded eggs for milk when the hens were laying. But winter had come early, work was scarce, and pride had kept her from asking for help until pride itself had become another thing she could no longer afford. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ma." Mary stood in the doorway, wrapped in a patched quilt, her hair a tangle of chestnut curls. "Is it morning?" Eleanor straightened and forced a smile. "It is. Go on and wake the others. We've got chores to do." Mary hesitated, her eyes flicking to the empty counter. Children noticed more than adults liked to admit. Are we having Thanksgiving dinner today?" Eleanor knelt and pulled her daughter close. "We'll have something," she said softly. "We always do." It wasn't a lie exactly. Something could mean anything. By mid-morning, the house was alive with the sounds of children, bare feet on wooden floors, the scrape of chairs, the low murmur of whispered complaints. Eleanor set a pot of beans on the stove, adding water to make them stretch. She rolled out dough with practiced hands, shaping what would become thin, sad biscuits. She kept her back turned so the children wouldn't see her wipe tears from her eyes. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards on the porch. Eleanor was just sliding the biscuits into the oven when she heard it, the creak of wheels on gravel. She froze. No one came out this way unless they had a reason. The Whitmore place was too far off the main road, too poor to be worth visiting. Eleanor wiped her hands and went to the window. A wagon was pulling into the yard. Not just any wagon. A large, sturdy one, pulled by 2 broad-shouldered horses with glossy coats and well-fitted harnesses. The wagon itself was piled high, covered with canvas that bulged and shifted as if barely containing what lay beneath. And walking alongside it was a man Eleanor recognized at once. Caleb Hartman. He was known throughout the county as the rancher, though that hardly did him justice. Caleb owned more land than most men could walk in a day. His cattle grazed as far as the eye could see, and his barns were landmarks in their own right. He was a quiet man, not given to boasting, but everyone knew he was wealthy. More than that, he was known for something rarer, fairness. He paid his hands well, helped neighbors without making a show of it, and never forgot a kindness. Eleanor's first instinct was panic. She smoothed her hair, glanced down at her worn dress, and suddenly felt the full weight of her situation. What was he doing here? The children crowded behind her, peering out the window. "Who's that?" Jacob asked. "A rancher," Samuel said with awe. "Look at those horses." The wagon came to a stop, and Caleb tipped his hat as he jumped down. He was tall and broad, with a face weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that seemed to take everything in without judging. He walked up the porch steps and knocked gently on the door. Eleanor opened it, her heart pounding. "Mrs. Whitmore," Caleb said, his voice warm and steady. "Happy Thanksgiving." She swallowed. "Mr. Hartman." "Aye, happy Thanksgiving." He glanced past her at the curious faces peeking around the doorframe, then back at Eleanor. "I hope I'm not intruding." "No," she said quickly. "Of course not. Please, come in." He shook his head. "I won't take up space inside. But I was hoping you might help me with something." "With something?" Eleanor echoed, confused. Caleb gestured toward the wagon. "I seem to have more food than I know what to do with. Thought you might lend me a hand unloading." For a moment, Eleanor didn't understand. Then it hit her, and her knees nearly gave way. She stepped onto the porch, the cold air stinging her cheeks. "Mr. Hartman, I can't." He raised a hand gently. "Before you say anything, let me tell you a story." She nodded, unsure what else to do. "Years ago," he began, "when my ranch was just getting started, I hit a rough patch. Lost cattle to disease, nearly lost the land. I was proud, like most men, and I didn't ask for help. Nearly cost me everything. But a neighbor showed up one day with a wagon not unlike this one. Didn't ask permission, just unloaded and left. Said it was Thanksgiving, and nobody ought to go hungry on Thanksgiving." Caleb met her eyes. "I never forgot that." Eleanor felt tears spill over, hot and sudden. "But there are others who need it more than we do." Caleb smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I've been making my rounds. And today, this wagon is meant for you." He climbed back onto the wagon and pulled aside the canvas. The children gasped. There were crates of potatoes, sacks of flour, jars of preserved fruits, bundles of carrots and onions, and a large, plump turkey wrapped in cloth. There was bread, fresh and fragrant, and a crock of butter. Even a small sack of sugar and a tin of coffee. It was more food than Eleanor had seen in one place in years. Mary started to cry. The twins clapped their hands, not fully understanding but sensing the excitement. Eleanor covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Caleb began unloading, handing boxes and sacks to Eleanor and the older children. "We'll put it in your pantry," he said. "And if there's no room, we'll make room." By the time they finished, the kitchen looked transformed. The once bare counter was crowded with abundance. The children hovered, wide-eyed, as if afraid it might all disappear. Eleanor sank into a chair, exhausted and grateful beyond words. "Mr. Hartman," she whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." He leaned against the doorframe. "You already have," he said simply, "by letting me be here." As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him. "Won't you stay? At least for dinner?" Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "I'd be honored." The children erupted in cheers. That afternoon, the farmhouse filled with smells Eleanor had almost forgotten. Roasting turkey, baking bread, potatoes boiling on the stove. The children helped where they could, laughing and bumping into one another. Even the old house seemed to straighten up, as if remembering better days. When they finally sat down to eat, the table groaned under the weight of food. Eleanor bowed her head, her voice trembling as she prayed, thanking God not just for the meal, but for the reminder that they had not been forgotten. As they ate, Caleb listened more than he talked. He laughed at the children's stories, answered their questions about the ranch, and helped Ruth carve the turkey with careful hands. It felt, Eleanor realized, like having family again. When dusk settled over the plains and the wagon stood empty in the yard, Caleb rose to go. Eleanor walked him to the door. "This won't be forgotten," she said. "Not ever." He tipped his hat. "That's not why I did it. But someday, when you see someone else in need, you'll remember. That's thanks enough." The wagon rolled away, the sound of its wheels fading into the evening. Inside, Eleanor looked around at her children, their bellies full, their faces flushed with warmth and happiness. For the first time in a long while, she felt something loosen in her chest. Thanksgiving, she thought. Maybe this is what it's really about. Not the food, not the table, but showing up with a wagon of plenty,